AIX, The Paradise of the Rheumatics, contributed to the New York Sun, 1891, by Mark Twain. Aix les Bains. Certainly this is an enchanting place. It is a strong word, but I think the facts justify it. True, there is a rabble of nobilities, big and little, here all the time, and often a king or two, but as these behave quite nicely and also keep mainly to themselves, they are little or no annoyance. And then a king makes the best advertisement there is, and the cheapest. All he costs is a reception at the station by the mayor and the police in their Sunday uniforms, shopfront decorations along the route from station to hotel, brass band at the hotel, fireworks in the evening, free bath in the morning. This is the whole expense, and in return for it he goes away from here with the broad of his back metaphorically stenciled over with display ads, which shout to all nations of the world, assisted by the telegraph. Rheumatism rooted at Aix les Bains. Gout admonished, nerves braced up. All diseases welcomed, and satisfaction given or the money returned at the door. We leave nature's noble cliffs and crags undefiled and uninsulted by the advertiser's paint brush. We use the back of a king, which is better and proper and more effective too, for the cliffs stay still and few see it. But the king moves across the fields of the world and is visible from all points, like a constellation. We are out for kings this week, but one will be along soon, possibly His Satanic Majesty of Russia. There's a colossus for you, a mysterious and terrible form that towers up into unsearchable space and casts a shadow across the universe like a planet in eclipse. There will be but one absorbing spectacle in this world when we stencil him and start him out. This is an old valley, this of Aix, both in the history of man and in the geological records of its rocks. Its little lake of Birgit carries the human history back to the lake dwellers, furnishing 7 groups of their habitations, and Dr. William Wakefield says in his interesting local guide that the mountains round about furnish, geographically, a veritable epitome of the globe. The stratified chapters of the Earth's history are clearly and permanently written on the sides of the roaring bulk of the Dent du Chat, but many of the layers of race, religion, and government, which in turn have flourished and perished here between the lake dweller of several thousand years ago and the French Republican of today, are ill-defined and uninforming by comparison. There are several varieties of pagans. They went their way, one after the other, down into night and oblivion, leaving no account of themselves, no memorials. The Romans arrive, 300 years ago. Other parts of France are rich with remembrances of their 8 centuries of occupation, but not many are here. Other pagans followed the Romans. By and by Christianity arrived, some 400 years after the time of Christ. The long procession of races, languages, religions, and dynasties demolished one another's records. It is man's way always. As a result, nothing is left of the handiwork of the remoter inhabitants of the region except the constructions of the lake dwellers and some Roman odds and ends. There is part of a small Roman temple, there is part of a Roman bath, there is a graceful and battered Roman arch. It stands on a turfy level over the way from the present great bathhouse, is surrounded by magnolia trees, and is both a picturesque and suggestive object. It has stood there some 1600 years. Its nearest neighbor, not 20 steps away, is a Catholic church. They are symbols of the 2 chief eras in the history of Aix, yes, and of the European world. I judge that the venerable arch is held in reverent esteem by everybody, and that this esteem is its sufficient protection from insult, for it is the only public structure I have yet seen in France which lacks the sign. It is forbidden to post bills here. Its neighbor the church has that sign on more than one of its sides, and other signs, too, forbidding certain other sorts of desecration. The arch's nearest neighbor just at its elbow, like the church's the telegraph office. So there you have the 3 great eras bunched together: the era of war, the era of theology, the era of business. You pass under the arch, and the buried CSRs seem to rise from the dust of the centuries and flit before you. You pass by that old battered church, and are in touch with the Middle Ages, and with another step you can put down 10 francs and shake hands with Oshkosh under the Atlantic. It is curious to think what changes the last of the 3 symbols stand for. Changes in men's ways and thoughts, changes in material civilization, changes in the deity or in men's conception of the deity, if that is an exacter way of putting it. The second of the symbols arrived in the earth at a time when the deity's possessions consisted of a small sky freckled with mustard seed stars, and under it, a patch of landed estate not so big as the holdings of the Tsar today, And all his time was taken up in trying to keep a handful of Jews in some sort of order, exactly the same number of them that the Tsar has lately been dealing with in a more abrupt and far less loving and long-suffering way. At a later time, a time within all old men's memories, the deity was otherwise engaged. He was dreaming his eternities away on his great white throne, steeped in the soft bliss of hymns of praise wafted aloft without ceasing from choirs of ransomed souls, Presbyterians and the rest. This was a deity proper enough to the size and conditions of things, no doubt a provincial deity with provincial tastes. The change since has been inconceivably vast. His empire has been unimaginably enlarged. Today he is a master of a universe made up of myriads upon myriads of gigantic suns, and among them, lost in that limitless sea of light, floats that atom. His earth, which once seemed so good and satisfactory, and cost so many days of patient labor to build, is a mere cork adrift in the waters of a shoreless Atlantic. This is a business era, and no doubt he is governing his huge empire now, not by dreaming the time away in the buzz of hymning choirs, with occasional explosions of arbitrary power disproportioned to the size of the annoyance, but by applying laws of a sort proper and necessary to the sane and successful management of a complex and prodigious establishment, and by seeing to it that the exact and constant operation of these laws is not interfered with for the accommodation of any individual or political or religious faction or nation. Mighty has been the advance of the nations and the liberalization of thought. A result of it is a changed deity, a deity of a dignity and sublimity proportioned to the majesty of his office and the magnitude of his empire, a deity who has been freed from 100 fretting chains and will in time be freed from the rest by the several ecclesiastical bodies who have these matters in charge. It was, without doubt, a mistake and a step backward when the Presbyterian synods of America lately decided, by vote, to leave him still embarrassed with the dogma of infant damnation. Situated as we are, we cannot at present know with how much of anxiety he watched the balloting, nor with how much of grieved disappointment he observed the result. Well, all these eras above spoken of are modern, they are of last week, they are of yesterday, they are of this morning, so to speak. The springs, the healing waters that gush up from under this hillside village, indeed are ancient. They indeed are a genuine antiquity. They antedate all those fresh human matters by processions of centuries. They were born with the fossils of the Dent du Chat, and they have been always abundant. They furnished 1,000,000 gallons a day to wash the lake dwellers with, the same to wash the CSRs with, no less to wash Balzac with, and have not diminished on my account. 1,000,000 gallons a day for how many days? Figures cannot set forth the number. The delivery, in the aggregate, has amounted to an Atlantic, and there is still an Atlantic down in there. By Dr. Wakefield's calculation, the Atlantic is 3/4 of a mile down in the earth. The calculation is based upon the temperature of the water, which is 114 degrees to 117 degrees Fahrenheit, the natural law being that below a certain depth heat augments at the rate of 1 degree for every 60 feet of descent. AIX is handsome, and is handsomely situated, too, on its hill slope, with its stately prospect of mountain range and plains spread out before it and about it. The streets are mainly narrow, and steep and crooked and interesting, and offer considerable variety in the way of names. On the corner of one of them you read this: Rue du Puits d'Enfer. Pit of Hell Street. Some of the sidewalks are only 18 inches wide. They are for the cats, probably. There is a pleasant park, and there are spacious and beautiful grounds connected with the two great pleasure resorts, the Circle and the Villa des Fleurs. The town consists of big hotels, little hotels, and pensions. The season lasts about 6 months, beginning with May. When it is at its height, there are thousands of visitors here, and in the course of the season as many as 20,000 in the aggregate come and go. These are not all here for the baths. Some come for the gambling facilities, and some for the climate. It is a climate where the field strawberry flourishes through the spring, summer, and fall. It is hot in the summer and hot in earnest, but this is only in the daytime. It is not hot at night. The English season is May and June. They get a good deal of rain then, and they like that. The Americans take July, and the French take August. By the 1st of July, the open-air music and the evening concerts and operas and plays are fairly underway, and from that time onward, the rush of pleasure has a steadily increasing boom. It is said that in August, the great grounds and the gambling rooms are crowded all the time, and no end of ostensible fun going on. It is a good place for rest and sleep, and general recuperation of forces. The book of Dr. Wakefield says there is something about this atmosphere which is the deadly enemy of insomnia, and I think this must be true. For if I am any judge, this town is at times the noisiest one in Europe, and yet a body gets more sleep here than he would at home. I don't care where his home is. Now, we are living at a most comfortable and satisfactory pension, with a garden of shade trees and flowers and shrubs, and a convincing air of quiet and repose. But just across the narrow street is the little market square, and at the corner of that is the church that is neighbor to the Roman arch, and that narrow street, and that billiard table of a marketplace, and that church are able, on a bet, to turn out more noise to a cubic yard at the time than any other similar combination in the earth or out of it. In the street, you have the skull-bursting thunder of the passing hack, a volume of sound not producible by 6 hacks anywhere else. On the hack is a lunatic with a whip, which he cracks to notify the public to get out of his way. This crack is as keen and sharp and penetrating and ear-splitting as a pistol shot at close range, and the lunatic delivers it in volleys, not single shots. You think you will not be able to live till he gets by, and when he does get by, he leaves only a vacancy for the bandit, who sells Le Petit Journal to fill with his strange and awful yell. He arrives with the early morning and the market people, and there is a dog that arrives at about the same time and barks steadily at nothing till he dies, and they fetch another dog just like him. The bark of this breed is the twin of the whip volley, and stabs like a knife. By and by, what is left of you the church bell gets. There are many bells, and apparently 6,000 or 7,000 town clocks, and as they are all 5 minutes apart probably by law there are no intervals. Some of them are striking all the time at least, after you go to bed they are. There is one clock that strikes the hour and then strikes it over again to see if it was right. Then for evenings and Sundays there's a chime that starts in pleasantly and musically, then suddenly breaks into a frantic roar, and boom, and crash of warring sounds that makes you think Paris is up and the revolution come again. And yet, as I have said, one sleeps here sleeps like the dead. Once he gets his grip on his sleep, neither hack, nor whip, nor newsfiend, nor dog, nor bell cyclone, nor all of them together, can wrench it loose or mar its deep and tranquil continuity. Yes, there is indeed something in this air that is death to insomnia. The buildings of the Circle and the Villa des Fleurs are huge in size, and each has a theater in it, and a great restaurant, also conveniences for gambling and general and variegated entertainment. They stand in ornamental grounds of great extent and beauty. The multitudes of fashionable folk sit at refreshment tables in the open air, afternoons, and listen to the music, and it is there that they mainly go to break the Sabbath. To get the privilege of entering these grounds and buildings you buy a ticket for a few francs, which is good for the whole season. You are then free to go and come at all hours, attend the plays and concerts free, except on special occasions, gamble, buy refreshments, and make yourself symmetrically comfortable. Nothing could be handier than those 2 little theaters. The curtain doesn't rise unt 30, then between the acts one can idle for half an hour in the other departments of the building, damaging his appetite in the restaurants or his pocketbook in the baccarat room. The singers and actors are from Paris, and their performance is beyond praise. I was never in a fashionable gambling hell until I came here. I had read several millions of descriptions of such places, but the reality was new to me. I very much wanted to see this animal, especially the new historic game of baccarat, and this was a good place, for AIX ranks next to Monte Carlo for high play and plenty of it. But the result was what I might have expected. The interest of the looker-on perishes with the novelty of the spectacle, that is to say, in a few minutes. A permanent and intense interest is acquirable in baccarat, or in any other game, but you have to buy it. You don't get it by standing around and looking on. The baccarat table is covered with green cloth, and is marked off in divisions with chalk or something. The banker sits in the middle, the croupier opposite. The customers fill all the chairs at the table, and the rest of the crowd are massed at their back and leaning over them to deposit chips or gold coins. Constantly money and chips are flung upon the table, and the game seems to consist in the croupiers reaching for these things with a flexible sculling oar and raking them home. It appeared to be a rational enough game for him, and if I could have borrowed his oar I would have stayed, but I didn't see where the entertainment of the others came in. This was because I saw without perceiving, and observed without understanding. For the widow and the orphan and the others do win money there. Once an old grey mother in Israel or elsewhere pulled out, and I heard her say to her daughter or her granddaughter as they passed me, "There, I've won 6 louis, and I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Also, there was this statistic. A friend pointed to a young man with the dead stub of a cigar in his mouth, which he kept munching nervously all the time and pitching $100 chips on the board, while two sweet young girls reached down over his shoulders to deposit modest little gold pieces, and said, "He's only funning, now. Wasting a few hundred to pass the time waiting for the gold room to open, you know, which won't be till after midnight, then you'll see him bet. He won £14,000 there last night." They don't bet anything there but big money. The thing I chiefly missed was the haggard people with the intense eye, the hunted look, the desperate mien, candidates for suicide and the pauper's grave. They are in the description as a rule, but they were off duty that night. All the gamblers, male and female, old and young, looked abnormally cheerful and prosperous. However, all the nations were there, clothed richly and speaking all the languages. Some of the women were painted, and were evidently shaky as to character. These items tallied with the descriptions well enough. The etiquette of the place was difficult to master. In the brilliant and populous halls and corridors you don't smoke, and you wear your hat, no matter how many ladies are in the thick throng of drifting humanity, but the moment you cross the sacred threshold and enter the gambling hell, off the hat must come, and everybody lights his cigar and goes to suffocating the ladies. But what I came here for 5 weeks ago was the baths. My right arm was disabled with rheumatism. To sit at home in America and guess out the European bath best fitted for a particular ailment or combination of ailments, it is not possible, and it would not be a good idea to experiment in that way, anyhow. There are a great many curative baths on the continent, and some are good for one disease and bad for another. So it is necessary to let your physician name a bath for you. As a rule, Americans go to Europe to get this advice, and South Americans go to Paris for it. Now and then an economist chooses his bath himself and does 1,000 miles of railroading to get to it, and then the local physicians tell him he has come to the wrong place. He sees that he has lost time and money and strength, and almost the minute he realizes this, he loses his temper. I had the rheumatism and was advised to go to AIX, not so much because I had that disease as because I had the promise of certain others. What they were was not explained to me, but they are either in the following menu or I have been sent to the wrong place. Dr. Wakefield's book says, "We know that the class of maladies benefited by the water and baths at AIX are those due to defect of nourishment, debility of the nervous system, or to a gouty, rheumatic, herpetic, or scrofulous diathysosol diseases extremely debilitating, and requiring a tonic, and not depressing, action of the remedy. This it seems to find here, as recorded experience and daily action can testify. According to the line of treatment followed particularly with due regard to the temperature, the action of the AIX waters can be made sedative, exciting, derivative, or alterative and tonic. The establishment is the property of France, and all the officers and servants are employees of the French government. The bathhouse is a huge and massive pile of white marble masonry and looks more like a temple than anything else. It has several floors and each is full of bath cabinets. There is every kind of bath for the nose, the ears, the throat, vapor baths, swimming baths, and all people's favorite, the douche. It is a good building to get lost in when you are not familiar with it. From early morning until nearly noon people are streaming in and streaming out without halt. The majority come afoot, but great numbers are brought in sedan chairs, a sufficiently ugly contrivance whose cover is a steep little tent made of striped canvas. You see nothing of the patient in this diving bell as the bearers tramp along, except a glimpse of his ankles bound together, and swathed around with blankets or towels to that generous degree that the result suggests a sore piano leg. By attention and practice, the pallbearers have got so that they can keep out of step all the time and they do it. As a consequence, their veiled churn goes rocking, tilting, swaying along like a bell buoy in a ground swell. It makes the oldest sailor homesick to look at that spectacle. The course is usually 15 douche baths and 5 tub baths. You take the douche 3 days in succession, then knock off and take a tub. You keep up this distribution through the course. If one course does not cure you, you take another one after an interval. You seek a local physician, and he examines your case and prescribes the kind of bath required for it, with various other particulars. Then you buy your course tickets and pay for them in advance $9. With the tickets, you get a memorandum book with your dates and hours all set down on it. The doctor takes you into the bath the first morning, and gives some instructions to the two doucheurs who are to handle you through the course. The pourboires are about 10 cents to each of the men for each bath, payable at the end of the course. Also at the end of the course, you pay 3 or 4 francs to the superintendent of your department of the bathhouse. These are useful particulars to know, and are not to be found in the books. A servant of your hotel carries your towels and sheet to the bath daily and brings them away again. They are the property of the hotel. The French government doesn't furnish these things. You meet all kinds of people at a place like this, and if you give them a chance, they will submerge you under their circumstances, for they are either very glad or very sorry they came, and they want to spread their feelings out and enjoy them. One of these said to me, "It's great, these baths. I didn't come here for my health. I only came to find out if there was anything the matter with me. The doctor told me if there was the symptoms would soon appear. After the first douche, I had sharp pains in all my muscles. The doctor said it was different varieties of rheumatism, and the best varieties there were, too. After my second bath I had aches in my bones and skull and around. The doctor said it was different varieties of neuralgia, and the best in the market, anybody would tell me so. I got many new kinds of pains out of my third douche. These were in my joints. The doctor said it was gout, complicated with heart disease, and encouraged me to go on. Then we had the fourth douche, and I came out on a stretcher that time, and fetched with me one vast, diversified undulating continental kind of pain, with horizons to it, and zones, and parallels of latitude, and meridians of longitude, and isothermal belts, and variations of the compasseau, everything tidy, and right up to the latest developments, you know. The doctor said it was inflammation of the soul, and just the very thing. Well, I went right on gathering them in: toothache, liver complaint, softening of the brain, nostalgia, bronchitis, osteology, fits, coleoptera, hydrangea, cyclopedia britannica, delirium tremens, and a lot of other things that I've got down on my list that I'll show you, and you can keep it if you like and tally off the bric-a-brac as you lay it in. The doctor said I was a grand proof of what these baths could do, said I had come here as innocent of disease as a grindstone, and inside of 3 weeks these baths had sluiced out of me every important ailment known to medical science, along with considerable more that were entirely new and patentable. Why, he wanted to exhibit me in his bay window. There seemed to be a good many liars this year. I began to take the baths and found them most enjoyable, so enjoyable that if I hadn't had a disease I would have borrowed one, just to have a pretext for going on. They took me into a stone-floored basin about 14 feet square, which had enough strange-looking pipes and things in it to make it look like a torture chamber. The 2 half-naked men seated me on a pine stool, and kept a couple of warm water jets as thick as one's wrist playing upon me while they kneaded me, stroked me, twisted me, and applied all the other details of the scientific massage to me for 7 or 8 minutes. Then they stood me up and played a powerful jet upon me all around for another minute. The cool shower bath came next, and the thing was over. I came out of the bathhouse, a few minutes later feeling younger and fresher and finer than I have felt since I was a boy. The spring and cheer and delight of this exaltation lasted 3 hours, and the same uplifting effect has followed the 20 douches which I have taken since. After my first douche I went to the chemist, on the corner, as per instructions, and asked for half a glass of chal water. It comes from a spring 16 miles from here. It was furnished to me, but perceiving that there was something the matter with it, I offered to wait till they could get some that was fresh, but they said it always smelled that way. They said that the reason that this was so much ranker than the sulfur water of the bath was that this contained 32 times as much sulfur as that. It is true, but in my opinion that water comes from a cemetery, and not a fresh cemetery either. History says that one of the early Roman generals lost an army down there somewhere. If he could come back now, I think this water would help him find it again. However, I drank the chal, and have drunk it once or twice every day since. I suppose it is all right, but I wish I knew what was the matter with those Romans. My first baths developed plenty of pain, but the subsequent ones removed almost all of it. I have got back the use of my arm these last few days, and I am going away now. There are many beautiful drives about AIX, many interesting places to visit, and much pleasure to be found in paddling around the little Lake Burgett on the small steamers. But the excursion which satisfied me best was a trip to Annecy and its neighborhood. You go to Annecy in an hour by rail, through a garden land that has not had its equal for beauty perhaps since Eden, And certainly not Eden was cultivated as this garden is. The charm and loveliness of the whole region are bewildering. Picturesque rocks, forest-clothed hills, slopes richly bright in the cleanest and greenest grass, fields of grain without freck or flaw, dainty of color and as shiny and shimmery as silk, old gray mansions and towers, half buried in foliage and sunny eminences, deep chasms with precipitous walls, and a swift stream of pale blue water between, with now and then a tumbling cascade, and always noble mountains in view, with vagrant white clouds curling about their summits. Then at the end of an hour you come to Annecy and rattle through its old crooked lanes, built solidly up with curious old houses that are a dream of the Middle Ages, and presently you come to the main object of your trip, Lake Annecy. It is a revelation, it is a miracle. It brings the tears to a body's eyes, it affects you just as all things that you instantly recognize as perfect affect you: perfect music, perfect eloquence, perfect art, perfect joy, perfect grief. It stretches itself out there in a caressing sunlight, and away toward its border of majestic mountains, a crisped and radiant plain of water of the divinest blue that can be imagined. All the blues are there, from the faintest shoal water suggestion of the color, detectable only in the shadow of some overhanging object, all the way through, a little blue and a little bluer still, and again a shade bluer, till you strike the deep, rich Mediterranean splendor which breaks the heart in your bosom. It is so beautiful. And the mountains, as you skim along on the steamboat, how stately their forms, how noble their proportions, how green their velvet slopes, how soft the mottlings of the sun and shadow that play about the rocky ramparts that crown them, how opaline the vast upheavals of snow banked against the sky in the remotenesses beyond Mont Blanc, and the others how shall anybody describe? Why, not even the painter can quite do it, and the most the pen can do is to suggest. Up the lake there is an old Abbey Talleries relic of the Middle Ages. We stopped there, step from the sparkling water, and the rush and boom and fret and fever of the 19th century into the solemnity, and the silence, and the soft gloom, and the brooding mystery of a remote antiquity. The stone step at the water's edge had the traces of a worn-out inscription on it. The wide flight of stone steps that led up to the front door was polished smooth by the passing feet of forgotten centuries, and there was not an unbroken stone among them all. Within the pile was the old square cloister with covered arcade all around it, where the monks of the ancient times used to sit and meditate, and now and then welcome to their hospitalities the wandering knight with his tin breeches on. And in the middle of the square court, open to the sky, was a stone well curb, cracked and slick with age and use, and all about it were weeds, and among the weeds moldy brickbats that the crusaders used to throw at one another. A passage at the further side of the cloister led to another weedy and roofless little enclosure beyond, where there was a ruined wall clothed to the top with masses of ivy, and flanking it was a battered and picturesque arch. All over the building there were comfortable rooms and comfortable beds, and clean plank floors with no carpets on them. In one room upstairs were half a dozen portraits, dimming relics of the vanished centuries, portraits of abbots, who used to be as grand as princes in their old day, and very rich, and much worshipped and very bold. And in the next room there were a howling chromo and an electric bell. Downstairs there was an ancient wood carving with a Latin word commanding silence, and there was a spang-new piano close by. Two elderly French women, with the kindest and honestest and sincerest faces, have the abbey now, and they board and lodge people who are tired of the roar of cities and want to be where the dead silence and serenity and peace of this old nest will heal their blistered spirits and patch up their ragged minds. They fed us well, they slept us well, and I wish I could have stayed there a few years and got a solid rest. Marienbad, a health factory. The simple but sufficient regimen imposed on patients in an Austrian resort. Observations on digestion. This place is the village of Marienbad, Bohemia. It seems no very great distance from Annecy, in Haute-Savoie. To this place you make it in less than 30 hours by these Continental Express trains, but the changes in the scenery are great. They are quite out of proportion to the distance covered. From Annecy by AIX to Geneva, you have blue lakes, with bold mountains springing from their borders, and far glimpses of snowy wastes lifted against the horizon beyond, while all about you is a garden cultivated to the last possibility of grace and beauty, a cultivation which doesn't stop with the handy lower levels, but is carried right up the sheer steeps, and propped there with ribs of masonry, and made to stay there in spite of Newton's law. Beyond Geneva, beyond Lausanne, at any rate you have for a while a country which noticeably resembles New England, and seems out of place, and like an intruder, who is wearing his everyday clothes at a fancy dress ball. But presently on your right, huge green mountain ramparts rise up, and after that for hours you are absorbed in watching the rich shadow effects which they furnish, and are only dully aware that New England is gone, and that you are flying past quaint and unspeakable old towns and towers. Next day you have the Lake of Zurich, and presently the Rhine is swinging by you. How clean it is, how clear it is, how blue it is, how green it is, how swift and rollicking and insolent are its gait and style, how vivid and splendid its colors, beautiful wreck and chaos of all the soap bubbles in the universe. A person born on the Rhine must worship it. Yes, that is where his heart would be, that is where his last thoughts would be, the soldier of the Legion who lay dying in Algiers. And by you are in a German region, which you discover to be quite different from the recent Swiss lands behind you. You have a sea before you, that is to say, the green land goes rolling away in ocean swells to the horizon. And there is another new feature. Here and there at wide intervals you have islands, hills 200 and 300 feet high, of a haystack form, that rise abruptly out of the green plain, and are wooded solidly to the top. On the top there is just room for a ruined castle, and there it is, every time. Above the summit you see the crumbling arches and broken towers projecting. Beyond Stuttgart, next day you find other changes still. By and by, approaching and leaving Nuremberg and down by Neuhaus, your landscape is humped everywhere with scattered knobs of rock, unsociable crags of a rude, tower-like look, and thatched with grass and vines and bushes. And now and then you have gorges too, of a modest pattern as to size, with precipice walls curiously carved and honeycombed by don't know what but water, no doubt. The changes are not done yet, for the instant the country finds it is out of Württemberg, and into Bavaria it discards one more thickness of soil to go with previous disrobings, and then nothing remains over the bones but the shift. There may be a poorer soil somewhere, but it is not likely. A couple of hours from Bayreuth you cross into Bohemia, and before long you reach this Marienbad, and recognize another sharp change, the change from the long ago to today. That is to say, from the very old to the spick and span new, from an architecture totally without shapeliness or ornament to an architecture attractively equipped with both, from universal dismalness as to color to universal brightness and beauty as to tint, from a town which seems made up of prisons to a town which is made up of gracious and graceful mansions, proper to the light of heart and crimeless. It is like jumping out of Jerusalem into Chicago. The more I think of these many changes, the more surprising the thing seems. I have never made so picturesque a journey before, and there cannot be another trip of like length in the world that can furnish so much variety and of so charming and interesting a sort. There are only 2 or 3 streets here in this snug pocket in the Hemlock Hills, but they are handsome. When you stand at the foot of a street and look up at the slant of it, you see only block fronts of graceful pattern, with happily broken lines and the pleasant accent of bay projections and balconies in orderly disorder and harmonious confusion, and always the color is fresh and cheery, various shades of cream, with softly contrasting trimmings of white, and now and then a touch of dim red. These blocks are all thick-walled, solid, massive, tall for this Europe, but it is the brightest and newest-looking town on the continent, and as pretty as anybody could require. The steep hills spring high aloft from their very back doors and are clothed densely to their tops with hemlocks. In Bavaria, everybody is in uniform, and you wonder where the private citizens are, but here in Bohemia the uniforms are very rare. Occasionally one catches a glimpse of an Austrian officer, but it is only occasionally. Uniforms are so scarce that we seem to be in a republic. Almost the only striking figure is the Polish Jew. He is very frequent. He is tall and of grave countenance, and wears a coat that reaches to his ankle bones, and he has a little wee curl or two in front of each ear. He has a prosperous look, and seems to be as much respected as anybody. The crowds that drift along the promenade at music time twice a day are fashionably dressed after the Parisian pattern, and they look a good deal alike, but they speak a lot of languages which you have not encountered before, and no ignorant person can spell their names, and they can't pronounce them themselves. Marienbad, Mary's bath. The Mary is the Virgin. She is the patroness of these curative springs. They try to cure everything: gout, rheumatism, leanness, fatness, dyspepsia, and all the rest. The whole thing is the property of a convent, and has been for 600 or 700 years. However, there was never a boom here until a quarter of a century ago. If a person has the gout, this is what they do with him. They have him out at 5:30 in the morning and give him an egg and let him look at a cup of tea. At 6 he must be at his particular spring. With his tumbler hanging at his belt end, he will have plenty of company there. At the first note of the orchestra, he must lift his tumbler and begin to sip his dreadful water with the rest. He must sip slowly and be a long time at it. Then he must tramp about the hills for an hour or so and get all the exercise and fresh air possible. Then he takes his tub or wallows in his mud, if mud baths are his sort. By noon he has a fine appetite, and the rules allow him to turn himself loose and satisfy it, so long as he is careful and eats only such things as he doesn't want. He puts in the afternoon walking the hills and filling up with fresh air. At night, he is allowed to take 3 ounces of any kind of food he doesn't like and drink 1 glass of any kind of liquor that he has a prejudice against. He may also smoke 1 pipe if he isn't used to it. At 9:30 sharp, he must be in bed and his candle out. Repeat the whole thing the next day. I don't see any advantage in this over having the gout. In the case of most diseases, that is about what one is required to undergo, and if you have any pleasant habit that you value, they want that. They want that the first thing. They make you drop everything that gives an interest to life. Their idea is to reverse your whole system of existence and make a regenerating revolution. If you are a Republican, they make you talk free trade. If you are a Democrat, they make you talk protection. If you are a prohibitionist, you have got to go to bed drunk every night till you get well. They spare nothing, they spare nobody. Reform, reform, that is the whole song. If a person is an orator, they gag him. If he likes to read, they won't let him. If he wants to sing, they make him whistle. They say they can cure any ailment, and they do seem to do it. But why should a patient come all the way here? Why shouldn't he do these things at home and save the money? No disease would stay with a person who treated it like that. I didn't come here to take baths, I only came to look around. But first one person, then another began to throw out hints, and pretty soon I was a good deal concerned about myself. One of these gouties here said I had a gouty look about the eye. Next, a person who has catarrh of the intestines asked me if I didn't notice a dim sort of stomach ache when I sneezed. I hadn't before, but I did seem to notice it then. A man that's here for heart disease said he wouldn't come downstairs so fast if he had my build and aspect. A person with an old gold complexion said a man died here in the mud bath last week that had a petrified liver, good deal such a looking man as I am, and the same initials, and so on, and so on. Of course, there was nothing to be uneasy about, and I wasn't what you may call really uneasy, but I was not feeling very well, that is, not brisk, and I went to bed. I suppose that was not a good idea, because then they had me. I started in at the supper end of the mill and went through. I am said to be all right now, and free from disease, but this does not surprise me. What I have been through in these 2 weeks would free a person of pretty much everything in him that wasn't nailed there, any loose thing, any unattached fragment of bone, or meat, or morals, or disease, or propensities, or accomplishments, or what not. And I don't say but that I feel well enough. I feel better than I would if I was dead, I reckon. And besides, they say I am going to build up now and come right along and be all right. I am not saying anything, but I wish I had enough of my diseases back to make me aware of myself, and enough of my habits to make it worthwhile to live. To have nothing the matter with you and no habits is pretty tame, pretty colorless. It is just the way a saint feels, I reckon. It is at least the way he looks. I never could stand a saint. That reminds me that you see very few priests around here, and yet, as I have already said, this whole big enterprise is owned and managed by a convent. The few priests one does see here are dressed like human beings, and so there may be more of them than I imagine. 15 priests dressed like these could not attract as much of your attention as would one priest at Aix-les-Bains. You cannot pull your eye loose from the French priest as long as he is in sight. His dress is so fascinatingly ugly. I seem to be wandering from the subject, but I am not. This is about the coldest place I ever saw, and the wettest, too. This August seems like an English November to me. Rain? Why, it seems to like to rain here. It seems to rain every time there is a chance. You are strictly required to be out airing and exercising whenever the sun is shining. So I hate to see the sun shining because I hate air and exercise, duty air and duty exercise taken for medicine. It seems ungenuine, out of season, degraded to sordid utilities. A subtle spiritual something gone from it which one can't describe in words, but don't you understand? With that gone, what is left but canned air, canned exercise, and you don't want it. When the sun does shine for a few moments or a few hours, these people swarm out and flock through the streets, and over the hills and through the pine woods, and make the most of the chance. And I have flocked out too, on some of these occasions, but as a rule I stay in and try to get warm. And what is there for means, besides heavy clothing and rugs, and the polished white tomb that stands lofty and heartless in the corner, and thinks it is a stove? Of all the creations of human insanity, this thing is the most forbidding. Whether it is heating the room or isn't, the impression is the same cold indifference. You can't tell which it is doing without going and putting your hand on it. They burn little handfuls of kindlings in it, no substantial wood, and no coal. The fire burns out every 15 minutes, and there is no way to tell when this has happened. On these dismal days, with the rain steadily falling, it is no better company than a corpse. A roaring hickory fire, with the cordial flames leaping up the chimney, but I must not think of such things, they make a person homesick. This is a most strange place to come to get rid of disease. That is what you think most of the time. But in the intervals, when the sun shines and you are tramping the hills and are comparatively warm, you get to be neutral, maybe even friendly. I went up to the Aussichtturm the other day. This is a tower which stands on the summit of a steep hemlock mountain here. A tower which there isn't the least use for, because the view is as good at the base of it as it is at the top of it. But Germanic people are just mad for views. They never get enough of a view. If they owned Mont Blanc, they would build a tower on top of it. The roads up that mountain through that hemlock forest are hard-packed and smooth, and the grades are easy and comfortable. They are for walkers, not for carriages. You move through steep silence and twilight, and you seem to be in a million-columned temple. Whether you look up the hill or down it, you catch glimpses of distant figures flitting without sound, appearing and disappearing in the dim distances, among the stems of the trees, and it is all very spectral, and solemn and impressive. Now and then the gloom is accented and sized up to your comprehension in a striking way. A ray of sunshine finds its way down through, and suddenly calls your attention, for where it falls, far up the hillslope in the brown duskiness, it lays a stripe that has a glare like lightning. The utter stillness of the forest depths, the soundless hush, the total absence of stir or motion of any kind in leaf or branch, are things which we have no experience of at home, and consequently no name for in our language. At home there would be the plaint of insects, and the twittering of birds, and vagrant breezes would quiver the foliage. Here it is the stillness of death. This is what the Germans are forever talking about, dreaming about, and despairingly trying to catch and imprison in a poem, or a picture, or a song. They adored Waldeinsamkeit, loneliness of the woods. But how catch it? It has not a body, it is a spirit. We don't talk about it in America, or dream of it, or sing about it because we haven't it. Certainly there is something wonderfully alluring about it, beguiling, dreamy, unworldly. Where the gloom is softest and richest, and the peace and stillness deepest, far up on the side of that hemlock mountain, a spot where Goethe used to sit and dream, is marked by a granite obelisk, and on its side is carved this famous poem, which is the master's idea of Waldeinsamkeit. It is raining again now. However, it was doing that before. I have been over to the establishment and had a tub bath with 2 kinds of pine juice in it. These fill the room with a pungent and most pleasant perfume. They also turn the water to a color of ink and cover it with a snowy suds, 2 or 3 inches deep. The bath is cool, about 75 degrees or 80 degrees F, and there is a cooler shower bath after it. While waiting in the reception room all by myself, 2 men came in and began to talk. Politics, literature, religion. No, their ailments. There is no other subject here, apparently. Wherever 2 or 3 of these people are gathered together, there you have it, every time. The first that can get his mouth open contributes his disease and the condition of it, and the others follow with theirs. The 2 men just referred to were acquaintances, and they followed the custom. One of them was built like a gasometer, and is here to reduce his girth. The other was built like a derrick, and is here to fat up, as they express it at this resort. They were well satisfied with the progress they were making. The gasometer had lost 1/4 of a ton in 10 days, and showed the record on his belt with pride, and he walked briskly across the room, smiling in a vast and luminous way, like a harvest moon, and said he couldn't have done that when he arrived here. He buttoned his coat around his equator and showed how loose it was. It was pretty to see his happiness. It was so childlike and honest. He set his feet together and leaned out over his person and proved that he could see them. He said he hadn't seen them from that point before for 15 years. He had a hand like a boxing glove. And on one of his fingers, he had just found a diamond ring which he had missed 11 years ago. The minute the derrick got a chance, he broke in and began to tell how he was piling on blubber right along 3/4 of an ounce every 4 days, and he was still piping away when I was sent for. I left the fat man standing there panting and blowing, and swelling and collapsing like a balloon, his next speech all ready and urgent for delivery. The patients are always at that sort of thing, trying to talk one another to death. The fat ones and the lean ones are nearly the worst at it, but not quite. The dyspeptics are the worst. They are at it all day and all night and all along. They have more symptoms than all the others put together, and so there is more variety of experience, more change of condition, more adventure, and consequently more play for the imagination, more scope for lying, and in every way a bigger field to talk. Go where you will, hide where you may, you cannot escape that word liver. You overhear it constantly in the street, in the shop, in the theater, in the music grounds. Wherever you see 2 or a dozen people of ordinary bulk talking together, you know they are talking about their livers. When you first arrive here, your new acquaintances seem sad and hard to talk to, but pretty soon you get the lay of the land and the hand of things, and after that you haven't any more trouble. You look into the dreary, dull eye and softly say, "Well, how's your liver?" You will see that dim eye flash up with a grateful flame, and you will see that jaw begin to work, and you will recognize that nothing is required of you from this out, but to listen as long as you remain conscious. After a few days, you will begin to notice that out of these people's talk a gospel is framing itself, and next you will find yourself believing it. It is this that a man is not what his rearing, his schooling, his beliefs, his principles make him, he is what his liver makes him. That with a healthy liver he will have the clear-seeing eye, the honest heart, the sincere mind, the loving spirit, the loyal soul, the truth and trust and faith that are based as Gibraltar is based, and that with an unhealthy liver he must and will have the opposite of all these. He will see nothing as it really is. He cannot trust anybody or believe in anything. His moral foundations are gone from under him. Now, isn't that interesting? I think it is. One of the most curious things in these countries is the street manners of the men and women. In meeting you they come straight on without swerving a hair's breadth from the direct line and wholly ignoring your right to any part of the road. At the last moment, you must yield up your share of it and step aside, or there will be a collision. I noticed this strange barbarism first in Geneva 12 years ago. In Aix-les-Bains, where sidewalks are scarce and everybody walks in the streets, there is plenty of room, but that is no matter. You are always escaping collisions by mere quarter inches. A man or woman who is headed in such a way as to cross your course presently, without a collision, will actually alter his direction shade by shade and compel a collision, unless at the last instant you jump out of the way. Those folks are not dressed as ladies and gentlemen, and they do not seem to be consciously crowding you out of the road. They seem to be innocently and stupidly unaware that they are doing it. But not so in Geneva. They're this class, especially the men, crowd out men, women, and girls of all rank and raiment consciously, and intentionally crowd them off the sidewalk and into the gutter. There was nothing of this sort in Bayreuth, but here the thing is astonishing. Collisions are unavoidable unless you do all the yielding yourself. Another odd thing here, this savagery is confined to the folk who wear the fine clothes. The others are courteous and considerate. A big burly Comanche, with all the signs about him of wealth and education, will tranquilly force young ladies to step off into the gutter to avoid being run down by him. It is a mistake that there is no bath that will cure people's manners, but drowning would help. However, perhaps one can't look for any real showy amount of delicacy of feeling in a country where a person is brought up to contemplate, without a shudder, the spectacle of women harnessed up with dogs and hauling carts. The woman is on one side of the pole, the dog on the other, and they bend to the work and tug and pant, and strain, and the man tramps leisurely alongside and smokes his pipe. Often the woman is old and gray, and the man is her grandson. The Austrian national ornithological device ought to be replaced by a grandmother harnessed to a slush cart with a dog. This merely in the interest of fact. Heraldic fancy has been a little too much overworked in these countries, anyway. Lately one of those curious things happened here which justify the felicitous extravagances of the stage and help us to accept them. A despondent man, bankrupt, friendless, and desperate, dropped a dose of strychnia into a bottle of whiskey and went out in the dusk to find a handy place for his purpose, which was suicide. In a lonely spot, he was stopped by a tramp, who said he would kill him if he didn't give up his money. Instead of jumping at the chance of getting himself killed, and thus saving himself the impropriety and annoyance of suicide, he forgot all about his late project and attacked the tramp in a most sturdy and valiant fashion. He made a good fight, but failed to win. The night passed, the morning came, and he woke out of unconsciousness to find that he had been clubbed half to death and left to perish at his leisure. Then he reached for his bottle to add the finishing touch, but it was gone. He pulled himself together and went limping away, and presently came upon the tramp stretched out stone dead with the empty bottle beside him. He had drunk the whiskey and committed suicide innocently. Now, while the man who had been cheated out of his suicide stood there bemoaning his hard luck and wondering how he might manage to raise money enough to buy some more whiskey and poison, some people of the neighborhood came by, and he told them about his curious adventure. They said that this tramp had been the scourge of the neighborhood and the dread of the constabulary. The inquest passed off quietly and to everybody's satisfaction, and then the people, to testify their gratitude to the hero of the occasion, put him on the police, on a good enough salary, and he is all right now and is not meditating suicide anymore. Here are all the elements of the naivest Arabian tale. A man who resists robbery when he hasn't anything to be robbed of does the very best to save his life when he has come out purposely to throw it away, and finally is victorious in defeat, killing his adversary in an effectual and poetic fashion after being already hors du combat himself. Now if you let him rise in the service and marry the chief of police's daughter, it has the requisite elements of the Oriental romance, lacking not a detail so far as I can see.